Morning, everyone. It's time for another data update because I have some data. I wasn't quite ready to show it on Saturday, but today's Tuesday, and I'm actually, after waiting for the weekend to come in, I've got some good data to show you, especially about my particular region. So I want to cut right to it. Usually I plan for 10 minutes, and you can see how that works out. I usually talk for 20 minutes. I'm planning for 5, so let's see if I can get in under 10. With all that, the thing that I have to say is I have some measured good news for certain regions of the U.S. There are some graphs that have turned a corner. I've been waiting for this ever since I started to do these drop-off graphs. So to give you the conclusions at the beginning in sort of the abstract form, what's happening in different regions is we're seeing the virus is behaving differently in different hotspots. New York and New Jersey, they should be considered as a single hotspot, but they are too far away from the West Coast to be considered the same sort of hotspot. The virus is behaving differently in these different places. And the question is, how do we group it? One of the things I want to say is I want to start by grouping it as states and then group certain states together. We shouldn't start grouping it as a country. We're just too big of a country and too diverse. States are what we should be looking at. And looking at that, the West Coast is doing well. I have to moderate that a little bit for California, but it's looking like California, if anything, is playing out a little bit slower than Washington, for example, because of successful distancing. Successful distancing will actually push down the peak of the epidemic, but it'll also push back the end of the epidemic. You end up winning overall, but you've got to be aware that just because the epidemic's lingering, that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. Sometimes it's what you want. You've got to realize that what the graph is dependent on these things. So specifically in different states, where do we see the graph drop off, the drop off that I've been waiting for a long time? We clearly see it in Washington, and I was actually pleasantly surprised to see what I consider to be a clear drop off in Michigan and Louisiana. Both of these, by the way, the drop off means you're past the halfway point. It doesn't mean you can let up now necessarily, but it does mean that maybe you can think about what would be the way to let up first in the gentlest way possible from the restrictions that you're undergoing. I also possibly see a corner in Florida and California. Texas, I don't see a clear corner yet. And this has implications for which states should reduce restrictions first and how. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here's the drop-off graph updated as of last night for the different states that I've been looking at. And you can see again the states in gray, New York and New Jersey, are way up there. They are flattening, but they are not dropping yet. And so at least they're not rising at the same rate. They're still going up by a huge amount. So let's zoom in on the states that are not on the East Coast. And so these different states, if we go down from the top, the yellow's Michigan, and you can see this is cases, and I've changed it to last 7 days, by the way, from last 3 days where I've been doing it. You see the yellow dots dropping down. Michigan cases are definitely looking post-peak. Now, there can be a second peak. There can be all sorts of things you can worry about. But what I'm saying right now, do we have evidence that this first wave is declining in terms of cases? Right here, there's the evidence for Michigan. Louisiana, was really worried about it. It was shooting up really fast, but then it turned a corner and is falling down. And look down at the bottom of the graph, my home local analysis for Washington State, and you can see that that too is dropping. It actually looks like Michigan and Louisiana are dropping faster than Washington. It's possible that we have a more persistent infection, again, possibly because we have flattened it out. If you look at California, that's the blue line. It's a little bit hard to see because there's so many other colors there. California is sort of going flat and straight. It might be dropping off now. It's a little bit too early to say if it is, but it's definitely not shooting up, right? And if you look at the orange line for Florida, even that one's showing a bit of a drop-off. The Texas line is the one that I don't see much of a drop-off for yet. And what's weird is Texas is the one that's publicly talking about, okay, when are we going to open back up again? I would take the data to say, let's look more at other states first before Texas. I would like to see Texas drop off more before talking like this. But good news for Louisiana, Michigan, and for Washington. Now, that was for cases. Remember that it takes a couple weeks for those to become the real thing that we're worried about avoiding most, which is mortality. Here's the mortality graph, again moved to 7 days rather than 3 because there's a number of reasons. I'll talk about that in another video where I have another 10 minutes, okay? But if you look at the things here that I'm comparing Washington, California, Washington, King County, Snohomish, Italy, South Korea, and New York. The thing to see about this, on the top you have the white line and the gray line going together. New York and Italy are almost mirror images of each other so far. I wish this was not the case, but it tells us that if we were worried about Italy, if we send them help, we should also be sending New York help. I'm surprised by how close these graphs are charting, and I just can hope that New York will start to drop off like Italy did, maybe even a little earlier, but so far they're looking exactly the same. California is still going up. You can see that. Oh, and in fact, I should zoom in because when we move to this stage, we have California in the blue. It's still going up. Maybe it's struggling a little bit, but that looks more like noise in the data. But the good news is Washington is dropping off. Washington State, King County is also dropping off. I find it kind of interesting that Washington State is actually dropping off more than Washington, King, Snohomish. That seems to say that King Snohomish is more lingering. But at the end of the day, when you look at South Korea's line, even South Korea has a lingering infection rate, a lingering death cause that's happened. And that's probably the result of successful distancing. It is possible to actually distance too much. I don't think we have any sign of that. It looks like we're hitting it right about at the right amount, especially considering that we have avoided the critical care crisis. But if you look at this, you see that South Korea dropped off, but then it's sort of flattening. And because it's logarithmic, by the way, this is really small numbers of cases. This is not bad or epidemic in South Korea, but it just shows that this disease is lingering. Respiratory viruses are really hard to deal with. They're hard to control. And they spread like wildfire, and it's why we've been so concerned about it. With all of our concern, I still am happy to say that we look like South Korea, and let's hope that this drop-off continues. And my best data for last, you notice I talked about cases, I've talked about mortality. I didn't talk about the most important data to me, but also the hardest to get and most complex to interpret, which is hospitalizations. And I only have Snohomish County for this, but Snohomish County, I've been collecting these data, and I've talked about how it's been sort of creeping up, and I've been hoping it would go down. Well, just yesterday they reported the data. They don't report the data over the weekend. Just yesterday they reported the data, and the data is down. I've done a linear interpolation, by the way, to assume what Saturdays and Sundays data would look like given Mondays. Literally, we had a drop from over 100 to under 50. That's a huge drop. Now, the orange isolated at home line is still going up, but I think that we are very possibly detecting more cases. We know that these people staying home, we know they have COVID-19. And that's one of the reasons why they're going up. There's no way that I can look at that data point and not be happy. The only thing that my scientist mind says to me is it's really just one data point. So I don't want to say we're out of the woods yet, but this is the thing I've been waiting for. I've been waiting for all of these graphs to drop off, and I've shown you that they've all dropped off. I'm not willing to go any farther as far as interpretation. So I want to leave this off here with the good news, and remember all of the complications that I talked about on the previous ones. But this is good news today. Maybe we will be able to talk about getting together in small groups, not big ones, in the coming weeks. So let's make those decisions based on the data. The data are looking good. And so I'll leave you with that. Happy Tuesday. And I've got to get back to doing my classes because our quarter has started online. So it looks like I've come in at just under 10 minutes. So for the first time, we'll have a single-digit minutes here. All right, everyone, stay distant for now. Stay safe. And I believe I can see a time when we won't have to be as distant as we are today.